Hello, everybody. Hello. It's so nice to see you all here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Some folks that I saw last night too. Here for all the learning.
Yes, for sure.
Well, welcome. Good to have you. We're going to give folks just a few more minutes.
No.
All right. So I'm the person who's running the tech and stuff like that tonight. So I think it's easier if you feel comfortable to just kind of raise your hand, your Zoom hand, or unmute yourself and flag me down if you have questions. Okay.
Yeah.
Rather than putting something in the chat. It's harder to see that. All right. What do you think? Should we get started? Why not? So, hello. This is my official welcome. My name is Rabbi Jessica Lenza, and I am the Associate Director of Creative Development. And it is very exciting for me to be teaching this class. It is a class that I've been thinking about doing for years, since the second year that I was in rabbinical school, because of a particular midrash that we're going to get to see later tonight that I thought just like kind of totally mind-blowing to me. And so I'm very excited to be able to bring this to you. I want to encourage you to please take care of yourselves, like when you're in the room, if you need to turn off your video, that's fine. But if you're able to keep your video on, it's so much nicer for me to be able to teach to faces than to black squares. And yeah, so are we ready? Yeah, we're ready to dive right in. Let's do it. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. So we're going to start with this line from the Talmud. This line, Rav Avira taught, in the merit of the righteous women that were in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. So this, we have a quote from the Talmud that Rav Avira believes that it was because of the righteous women among the Israelites when they were enslaved in Egypt that the Israelites were redeemed from Egypt. So I think that's a good jumping off point, because when we think about the Passover story, you can really tell it without mentioning any woman's name. You could say that there was a Pharaoh in Egypt who decided that the Israelites were dangerous and decreed cruel and unusual punishment against them. And eventually God sent a leader to negotiate with Pharaoh for their release, and Pharaoh refused. God sends 10 plagues. Pharaoh lets them go, and they make it to the Sea of Reeds. And then on those shores, God splits the sea so that the Israelites can pass through on dry land. You could absolutely talk about that story without mentioning one woman's name, and really no human name. Traditionally, in our Haggadah, in the text that we use to guide us through our Seders at Passover, you're not supposed to mention even Moses's name, because the redemption from Egypt, from slavery in Egypt, should be credited exclusively to God. So if we could not mention any woman's name, then how is it that Rav Avira, his perspective here stands? we need a more fleshed out version of this story in order to truly get to what Rav Avira is talking about. So let's see who some of these women are. I'm going to start with somebody you might not have ever heard of, but she's one of the most fascinating characters in rabbinic literature. Her name is Serach bat Asher. If you've heard of her name before, will you just like put a thumbs up or something in your, yeah. Serach bat Asher. Okay, yes, that's what I thought. Very few people have heard her name. And that makes sense because she's mentioned in the Bible only twice. I think only twice, maybe 3 times. But we have no story about her in the Bible. She is mentioned among the list of Israelites who enter into Egypt. She is the daughter of Asher, meaning Jacob's son Asher. She is Jacob's granddaughter. And she makes it to Egypt, and she's also listed among the names of those who leave Egypt. And the rabbis let their imagination run wild when it comes to Serach bat Asher, because they notice this repetition, and according to the rabbis, there is no unnecessary repetition or extraneous word in the Torah. So the text is begging us to interpret this. And so the rabbis say, okay, so she was a person who was there when Joseph was around, and she was a person who was there when Moses was around. And now, according to the text, that's separated by hundreds of years. So she would have been incredibly old. And she plays a pivotal role, according to the rabbis, in the Passover story. Let's look at Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a midrashic text. Midrash is a genre of rabbinic literature that interprets the text, generally using different forms of like rules on wordplay, but also these wild, creative stories. And here's one. Rabbi Eliezer said, "The 5 letters of the Torah, which alone of all the letters in the Torah are of double shape, all appertain to the mystery of redemption." So what Rabbi Eliezer here is trying to do is explain this odd pattern that exists where there's a doubling of letters. And so there are several other examples. We're going to focus in on the one that is pertinent to our conversation. With pei, so the Hebrew letter pei, Israel was redeemed from Egypt. So that indication in the Torah, this doubling of the letter pei, and really the words pakadati, which means like I will surely remember you, that becomes instrumental in the redemption of the Israelites from Egypt. So here we have from Exodus 3, "I have surely visited you, pakadati, and seen that which is done to you in Egypt, and I have said, I will bring you out of the affliction of Egypt." So this is from Exodus chapter 3. Why do we have this weird sort of phrasing here? Why is that there? Why is that unique phrasing there? These letters were delivered. So, and now I've kind of cut some of the text here. So talking about this group of letters, they were delivered from only to our father Abraham, and then our father Abraham delivered them to Isaac, and Isaac delivered them to Jacob, and Jacob delivered the mystery of the redemption to Joseph, as it says, "But God will surely visit Yufkod," which is another kind of form of this, you. Joseph, his son, delivered the secret of the redemption to his brethren. Asher, the son of Jacob, delivered the mystery of the redemption to Serach, his daughter. So in this long chain, we go from Abraham to Serach bat Asher, who is entrusted with this secret code that these words are like the magic words, the words that will allow the Israelites to know that redemption is coming. And she is entrusted with them. She is the only woman in this list of women, even though we know that Abraham is married to Sarah, who God says, listen to her voice in speaking about Sarah. And Rebecca receives prophecy about her children, right? Leah and Rachel are, the mothers of the Israelite tribes, right? These are giants in as far as matriarchs go, right? But Serach bat Asher is the one who is trusted with this information. Joseph, his son, delivered. So we heard where. Okay. When Moses and Aaron came to see the elders of Israel and performed the signs in their sight, the elders of Israel went to Serach, the daughter of Asher, and they said to her, a certain man has come and he's performed signs in our sight, thus and thus. She said to them, there's no reality in the signs. Okay. So here Moses has returned after fleeing to Midian, and after seeing the burning bush, Moses has returned to Egypt. He's got a credibility issue because the Israelites do not know him as an Israelite. And so he has to prove that he's actually the person that is truly going to bring redemption to the Israelites. And so he and his brother Aaron, they perform these magical deeds that are miraculous. And the elders of Israel they're sort of like, oh, this looks legit. This looks good. Okay, let's check with Serach bat Asher because she's the one who will really know. And so here you have the entire leadership of the Israelites seeking out her guidance. And they tell her this impressive stuff that Moses and Aaron have displayed. And her response is, nonsense. Total nonsense. Who cares? He can turn what? Like his staff into a snake? Whatever. The Egyptian sorcerers can do that too. Not impressed. So then they said to her, Moses said, Pakod yifkod. God will surely visit you. I think visit is a bad translation here. It means more kind of like remember. And she said to them, he is the man who will redeem Israel in the future from Egypt. For thus did I hear, Pakod pakaditi, I have surely visited you or remembered you. Forthwith, the people believed in their God and God's messenger, as it said, and the people believed. And when they heard that Adonai had visited the children of Israel. Isn't that wild? That is, to me, that was so wild that here, all of these, like the spectacular kind of miracles that they perform, it means nothing to her. But the fact that they know the secret code that she is entrusted with, and then on her word, like immediately everybody says, okay, these guys are legit. And not only do they believe in Moses and Aaron, but they believe in God again. Maybe not again, but I don't know. It feels like they are reinvigorated in their belief that God will save them. Now, Serach bat Asher has many other stories that I think are very fascinating. And if this were a class on her, we would spend all the rest of our time on it. But we have to move on. I see, Lisa, you have a question or?
Just please, thanks. Could we look at the word in Hebrew, for visit or remember that you're pointing to, and just look a little bit more?
Yeah, so the word is here, pakod, and sometimes it's said pakod pakadati or pakod yifkod. It's not perfect. Here it is, pakod yifkod. And if I can very quickly pull up my Bible, no, I can't do it.
Well, maybe just about the root, because this this relation between remember and visit, I find very important or interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of memory, collective memory, if it's literally member, to remind of a different way.
Yeah,
Or-
let me do something. So I have this kind of fun, fancy Bible software called Accordance. And it's very impressive, I'm sure.
And I totally want to respect your plan and not get distracted. It just feels like it's really kind of essential.
It definitely is for this section here. So let me just see real quick. Okay. So let me share my screen here. So this is my fancy Bible software. It's connected to a biblical dictionary called Halot. And here we have the root Pe Kuf Daled, Pakad. And you can see all of the many different sort of permutations of what it can mean. To prescribe, to seek out, to scrutinize, to miss, to be present. So to keep safe, that's another one that might be relevant here. I'm trying to see if they're specifically mentioning our verse here, which is Exodus 3. I don't see it right now. But as you can tell, it's the kind of word that is used often and is used in lots of different ways. It's a great question, and that's a good thing to do more research on. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you. Any other questions about Serach bat Asher before we move on to our other ladies? Great. The code, yeah. So I did cut this text down so we don't get some of the other examples.
Rabbi, before you go on,
Sure.
is Sarah bat Asher in the Torah?
Her name is listed in the Torah, but she has no story associated.
Okay, so only that she left with Jacob and came, or with that family, and that she left, and then she left Egypt. Okay.
That's right. The only time we have her name is when she is counted among those who come into Egypt and those who leave Egypt. Okay, so as far as this code, like the idea is that it's kind of like, the secret password in order to get into, like, think about like a very fancy like club. If you want to get into the club, like there's a speakeasy. I live on the Upper East, and there's a speakeasy here, and it's an ice cream shop. And if you tell the hostess, "Can I see your basement?" then she'll let you down into the speakeasy, right? And so that's the kind of code that we're talking about here. That Abraham told to his child, told, right, all the way down to Serach bat Asher. And she knows this information that someday somebody is going to say this combination of words, pakod pakadati or pakod yivkod. Now, what the rabbis are doing here is they're looking at this, like the rabbis have the evidence of the text, and they see this kind of interesting pattern of this doubling of words with, it's a particular kind of verb form. And they're trying to understand, well, why are those words doubled? What can we learn from those words? And from that question, they come up with this very, I think, creative story that we don't have any evidence of in the Torah itself. I think it's just a wild example of rabbinic imagination.
I'm really sorry. I just must be exhausted, but it's the code is to say when the Jews will be redeemed. Is that what you mean? The combination, this code to the speakeasy, the code to the timing of redemption? Would that be
Yes.
fair?
Yes, it's that this is really going to happen. The person who says this code has been in direct communication with God and has real information here that redemption is coming to Israel.
And by redemption, we're relating it, you mean fleeing Egypt in this case. Redemption is this story.
The redemption is the act of God taking the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt to free.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for those clarifying questions. Okay, so here we start with Serach bat Asher. Nothing would have happened if she had dismissed Moses as she had at the beginning, because he didn't say the code to her yet. Nothing would have happened. The Israelites never would have believed in him. Then we get to Shifra and Pua. Now, these are characters that you might be more familiar with. Shifra and Pua are two midwives, and they practice a phenomenal act of civil disobedience. And I would say it is very unusual to have named female characters in the Bible if they play this kind of tangential role, which includes these two women. These two women, I would say, the pattern in biblical literature would be that they would have no names. Many significant female figures are unnamed in the Bible, including Pharaoh's daughter, who we'll talk about in a minute. But these two women get names. That's a signal that they're important. So here's what the Torah says. So we are in chapter 1 of the book of Exodus. We're at the very beginning of this story. Pharaoh has decided that he needs to oppress the Israelites in order to decrease their numbers. He's scared of how numerous they are. He's scared that they will rise up in rebellion against him. And so Pharaoh oppresses them even more. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and all sorts of tasks in the field. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other Pua, saying, "When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." So this phrase, Hebrew midwives, is very ambiguous in the text, meaning, are these Egyptian women who've been tasked to be midwives to the Hebrew people? Or are they Hebrew themselves and also midwives? It is unclear in the text. And I think there's there is varying interpretation to that, right? If these are Egyptian women who have been tasked to be midwives for the Hebrews, I think that feels different to me, their actions, than Hebrew women who are administering to the Hebrews. Interesting either way, but there's that kind of ambiguity in the text. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. So whereas we have in the beginning of the verse, or the beginning of this text, the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. Now, the word I think is different in the Hebrew, but like who do the midwives fear? Shiphrah and Puah, they fear God. They're not afraid of people. They're not afraid of Pharaoh.
I'm not sure I understand.
Oh my God, my watch. Sorry about that. And so they let all of the babies live. And when the king of Egypt summons the midwives and said to them, "Why are you promising letting these boys live? Like this, you had one job. I told you to do this. Why aren't you doing this?" And the midwives say to Pharaoh, and I think this is so clever because they kind of play into Pharaoh's stereotypical ideas, biased ideas of who the Hebrew women are, because they say, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous. And the word here, vigorous, could either be read as they are full of life or that they are animals. So by using this term here, they're kind of saying something to Pharaoh where he's already deemed the Israelites as being like animals. They're like vermin, right? They just give birth, like constantly, right? And so they're playing into his idea of who they are. And I think protecting themselves, shielding themselves from this act of defiance and from the repercussions of this act of defiance, right? So because they're so vigorous, because they're so full of life, or because they're so much like animals, before the midwife can come to them, they've given birth. We can't do anything. By the time we get there, the kid has already been born. And Pharaoh's whole plot here was to try and quietly commit genocide. Like Pharaoh was like, look, let's just kill all of the boys because boys grow up to be men. Men grow up to want to rebel and, they can become an army. The women, let's let them live. We'll marry them off to, or we'll not marry them off. We will give them to Egyptian men. And then the Israelite nation will disappear, right? And that was his first tactic of kind of doing this like quiet way of killing off the Israelites. But it doesn't work because the midwives disobey. And so what does God do? God rewards them. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. So not only did the midwives, get a reward from God, but also the people continued to do what Pharaoh didn't want them to do, which is to grow in number. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. The rabbis debate a little bit over what exactly it means for them to have established households. Some of them say that they become, essentially they become the matriarchs of various like families. This is one rabbinic idea. But it's not totally clear. Now, again, it's like that would make sense if they are of Israelite origin. If they're not of Israelite origin, like how does that work? It's not totally clear. But if they are of Israelite origin, why does Pharaoh trust them to do this thing? Like that would feel very unnatural to me, right? Like, I don't know. And so Pharaoh has to change tactic. And Pharaoh charged all his people saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So now it's beyond being secretive. This is a public decree that Pharaoh is empowering the people to commit acts of violence against the Israelites, against these innocent children. Rashi here, basically our most important medieval commentator on the Torah, who kind of filters rabbinic tradition. He's kind of like the Reader's Digest of rabbinic tradition. So as you're studying Torah, if you want to know what mainstream Jewish thought has to say about this text, you would go to Rashi, because he lived up until the 10th century or 11th century. So everything before that, he kind of filters into his commentary. So here he says, this, what does it mean when they say that the midwives allowed the boys to live? Well, he says, this may mean that they maintained the children in life, meaning that they provided them with food. This was not a passive act, according to Rashi in the rabbinic tradition. What the midwives did was more than just saying, we won't kill these boys. It went beyond that, because they made sure that these boys continued to live, according to the rabbinic tradition. And so this last text that I have about the midwives is, it's a 20th century text. This was an anonymous diary that was found in with entries from 1942. Sorry, I think this is meant to be 19. From 1942. And it's describing what happened in the Warsaw Ghetto. On seeing 2 pregnant women in the Warsaw Ghetto, an unknown diarist noted, if in today's dark and pitiless times, a Jewish woman can gather enough courage to bring a new Jewish being into the world and rear him, this is great heroism and daring. These are nameless Jewish heroines. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I read this text, I just had like all chills, because, you know, when we have been telling the story of Passover so much that we become a little desensitized to the brutality of it. We can. I mean, I don't know, in my family, when we do Seder, we have like, you know, finger puppets for all the 10 plagues. And it's kind of, and like, we have like silly songs and, you know, we retell this story with levity. But when you really read it, it is terrifying. And the parallels between what Pharaoh does and what Hitler did are significant. And to imagine Shifra and Pua working in an environment as dangerous as existed in the Warsaw Ghetto to help children live, I think it adds so much more to the heroism. And I think this idea of them being named is so much more important. Like, of course they're named here, you know? Yes, Idra. I'm sorry, I think you're muted.
I'm having really meaningful reverberations for many parts of this. And I'm not going to detour conversations, but I really want to say things because this is the nature I'm finding of these teachings. We go in multidimensional directions. So let me start. I love how you pointed out at the end of the Pharaoh story, the Pharaoh charged all his people. So the shift from having the midwives to creating lawlessness is like the things that happen in Texas, where citizens can bust anyone who may have helped anyone get an abortion. This is a big reverberation with Life Now and what you shared. I never knew about this. Thank you for this distinction. And I'm sure others of you all feel that too. When the Rashi one, they maintain the children in life. Now, these were midwives. So the children would be maintained by their own mother's breast milk. So I'm not sure really what that meant in that context. I don't want to necessarily get into that, but that's something that's, and that, what's the household? Were the women somehow protected by the women who were the midwives? Could a household be like a woman's community? I don't know. Who knows?
Fantastic observations. Yes, when those laws went into place where citizens were empowered to inform on other citizens for seeking healthcare, this is immediately what I thought of. In addition, so the other thing that you said was, well, they provided them with food. They provided the families with food. They made it possible for those families to continue to, and in the actual Hebrew, it says, Mayim umazon, with water and food. So they continue to help these families. And that's what I think we're supposed to be getting from that text. And then the other point that you brought up is very important because because this idea of house in rabbinic language, the word bait means house, but it can also be a euphemism for woman or wife. Now, I don't know if I don't think that's what the Torah is saying here, but if you wanted to, you could create a fantastic drash about the word household here, its relationship to female identity and female power and female domain. Really great things to bring to the conversation. Thank you, Adria. Sonia.
Yes, that was so rich. I have a different point to make, and it's just a little slip of a point, but it occurred to me during your teaching, Jessica, that this quote from Lucy Davidovitz, this quote from the if you could scroll down a little bit from on seeing the two pregnant women in the Warsaw Ghetto, it never occurred to me, I'm going to get choked up here, but it never occurred to me to think of that particular kind of heroism. I mean, we can't even, speaking for myself, I can't imagine surviving, the way people survived, that people survived at all, but to give birth, to have, I think of it more, yes, in terms of, there's this propulsion to reproduce, but it's more than that. It's a defiant and phenomenally courageous act. And the other thought that I had about this, when in the earlier text about Pharaoh's, thinking, yes, I also did have these associations to anti-Semitism throughout history and today, and this notion that Jews, it's so ironic in a way, I don't know if that's the right word, but that Jews are going to multiply, and we still are what, less than 1% of the entire human population. So it's so fascinating and tragic and hard sometimes to really grapple with. It's nothing to, there's no puppetry here, around this these stories. It's profound human survival and determination, spirituality, moving toward God's redemption. It's quite an extraordinary story we have right here. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you're right. I do see it as being absolutely extraordinary. And I feel like this image of pregnancy as protest, like there's something so powerful in that. When I think about people who, experienced the catastrophe of the Holocaust, I'm not thinking about people who were pregnant. Like, it just seems so beyond what the image is that I have in my mind. But of course there were pregnant people. Of course there were. And like the layer of complication surrounding that, I mean, I can't begin to imagine that. And then your other point about anti-Semitism, when I teach about the Holocaust, like many people, when they teach about the Holocaust, they start, maybe with Kristallnacht or, something like that. I start with this. I start with this story and look at the rhetoric, the propaganda that Pharaoh uses to whip the Egyptians into a frenzy of hatred. And, it is effective and enduring, this strategy, unfortunately, really. And so if you want to look at the roots of, what allowed something like the Holocaust to happen, you have to understand what Pharaoh did, I think. Yes, Lisa, Faith is saying yes to life. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and just real quickly, I too don't want to take away, but I really appreciate the point about the parallel today, because what also allowed the Holocaust to happen was eugenics and quantification, saying that a life is worth a certain data point. And this is, this push now. But I'm also appreciating how earlier, Rabbi, you talked about the ambiguity of Israelite women, or the midwives for the Israelites, or Egyptian. All we know is they were women. Thank you.
Yes. Women helping women, right? Very important thing. And that kind of connection sometimes transcends other kinds of boundaries. The connection that, of like the feminine across those boundaries of tribe or background. Right? All right, let's move on to Yocheved. So now I think that we're getting, more and more into main characters of the story. You might not remember her name, but Yocheved is Moses's mother. And you might not remember her name for good reason, because when she is first mentioned in the text, she doesn't have a name. She's not given a name until much later on in the book of Numbers. So in this first part, that when we are first introduced to her in Exodus chapter 2, this is all we have. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. We don't have the father's name either. It's just this guy, like a Levite man married a Levite woman. Okay. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall of him. Yocheved is also practicing civil disobedience here. She's so clever, because what was it that Pharaoh wants? Any boy that is born, you should throw into the Nile. So what does Yocheved say? Fine, I'll put my boy in the Nile, but I'm going to put him in a waterproof basket in the Nile and place him in an area where he won't drift away, and probably strategically in an area where I think he might be discovered. And I'll also put his sister over there to watch him. Now, technically, I mean, she's sort of obeying Pharaoh, right? To me, it's like so brilliant what these women do to work in and around a system that is designed to defeat them. And then later on in the book of Numbers, we get Amram, Moses' father, and his name, and also Yocheved. And we also are told that Aaron and Moses and Miriam are their children. But notice Miriam is unnamed in this. And here's another issue with this text, or not another issue, but this is something that the rabbis pick up on. Okay, so if this Levite guy marries a Levite woman and they have a son, how is it that who's a baby, how is it that they have a daughter who's old enough to also be looking after the son? Where did the daughter come from? Now, you might say, well, maybe it was from a previous marriage. That feels not like what the rabbis would want. So let's see what they have to say about this daughter, about Moses' sister, Miriam. So this is another piece of text from the Talmud. And the text is going to start, it's going to dive in on this first line here, a certain man of the house of Levi. Okay. The verse states, and there was a man of the house of Levi who took for a wife a daughter of Levi. And the Talmud, the Gemara asks, so where did he go? Like, what does that mean that he, whatever. Rav Yehuda bar Zavina says, he went according to the advice of his daughter, Miriam. Okay, where does that come from? Why is it that his daughter is telling him to go and get married? How does that come about? Nor, the natural progression of things, or not, strictly, but in the biblical and rabbinic perspective, you should be married and then you have the kid. So where did his daughter come from?
Well, maybe his wife, her mother died.
So that is a possibility. The rabbis aren't going there. That would be too simple of an explanation. They are looking to do something more radical. I think, yes. Okay, so he went on according to the advice of his daughter Miriam. A sage teaches Amram, the father of Moses, was the great man of his generation. He was a big deal. Once he saw that the wicked Pharaoh said, every son that is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive, he said, we are laboring for nothing by bringing children into the world to be killed. Therefore, he arose and divorced his wife, and all others who saw this followed his example and arose and divorced their wives. So Amram is like, look, this is just like we are contributing to the problem. If we don't have any babies, then Pharaoh has no babies to kill. So let's divorce our wives and we won't contribute to this problem. We won't give Pharaoh anything, any human to be killed. But Miriam sees things differently. And I mean, the chutzpah like that she has, right? Because her dad is a big deal. He's a powerful man. But she says to him, Father, your decree is more harsh for the people than that of Pharaoh. You're worse than Pharaoh, is what she says to him. As Pharaoh decreed only with regard to the males, but you decreed both on the males and the females, and now no children will be born. Look, Pharaoh would said something terrible about boys, but what about the girls? We could still live. And not only that, she says, additionally, Pharaoh decreed to kill them only in this world, but you decreed in this world and in the world to come, as those not born will not enter the world to come. Doubly problematic, right? If there is no baby born, then there's no opportunity for that person to enter into the world to come. And she continues. Additionally, concerning Pharaoh the wicked, it's uncertain whether his decree will be fulfilled. And it is uncertain if his decree will not be fulfilled. You are a righteous person, and as such, your decrees will certainly be fulfilled. As it's stated with regard to the righteous, you shall also decree a thing, and it shall be established unto you. She's like, look, you're a big, important, good person. People listen to you more than they'll listen to evil Pharaoh. And so by you stating it, it is a foregone conclusion. With Pharaoh, maybe not. Amram accepted his daughter's words and arose and brought back, meaning he remarried his wife. And all others saw this, followed his example, and arose and brought back their wives. Here we have Miriam confronting her father, telling him he's worse than Pharaoh in at least 3 ways. And he is like, oh my God, you're so right. And he gets up immediately and he undoes it. And so that's how we have a baby boy with an older sister, even though their parents just got married. Right? Isn't it? I mean, the rabbinic logic is so fascinating to me. And the fact that they were giving this pivotal moment to Miriam is, I think, very interesting. Very interesting. All right. Any thoughts about Miriam or Yocheved before we move on to Lisa? Yes, makeup sex. Yeah, that's right. Actually, the Talmud goes on to say that when they get married, it's not like a small, tasteful second marriage with second wedding kind of feel. It's elaborate, and like Yocheved is dressed like a young bride, and she's like brought out on a glorious chair. It's like a very elaborate kind of thing, very joyous.
So it's interesting to have this relationship of this fully formed Miriam, who becomes the big sister of, bam, Moses. Moses is pretty important. And I don't know that I know of situations of a big sister and a younger brother and that kind of handoff and then relationship into the desert. You know, it's a lovely narrative. It's nice to think about it and feel about it. Yeah.
Yes, in the Bible, there are very few sibling relationships that are healthy, let alone supportive, right? Moses, Miriam, and Aaron, they have their flaws for sure, but they are the most like healthy example of sibling relationships that we have. Compared to like what happens in Genesis. I mean, God, like Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. I mean, like, it's like, it is brutal what siblings do to one another in the Bible. And this idea of like, so Miriam protected Moses even before he was born, right? Like she's set to watch over him when he's in the Nile, but it started before that. And the rabbis are the ones who are making this image of her happen. She is, and we have very little knowledge about Miriam in the Torah. The rabbis are the ones who expand more about her. Later, the Israelites will be wandering in the desert, and when Miriam dies, they cry out for water. The rabbis take that to mean that she had a magical well that traveled along with them and was able to find water in the desert. There's no text evidence for that at all in the Torah, but that has become such a iconic feature of who Miriam is, right? It's the rabbis who
It's in her name, Miriam. You can't not know that she's a water being and part of a nature spirit in some way, or magical or whatever.
Beautiful. Yes. Yam means sea. So yes, I think it's beautiful. All right, let's move on to Pharaoh's daughter. So this is what we have about her here in Exodus in chapter 2, right after Miriam is watching over Moses. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile while her maidens walked along the Nile, and she spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy, crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay you wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. And when the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water." So, I mean, there's something so cinematic about this scene here. You have Miriam looking over, watching her brother, and you have the princess of Egypt, the daughter of the man who has decreed that these children should be murdered. She discovers this baby, and she would have every sort of impulse, like you would think that she would want to fulfill her father's decree. At the very least, you would think she would leave the baby alone and not deal with it. But no, she sees this baby. She tells her servant to go and get this basket. She takes pity on this child. She knows immediately what's happened here, that this is an Israelite boy. And Miriam, standing there watching, sees what's going on. And she, before Pharaoh's daughter has a chance to even say anything or think of what to do, she's like, "Oh, you know what? I can help you with that. I know the perfect nanny. I'll be right back." And she gets Yocheved, and Yocheved becomes Moses's nurse for the first few years of his life, and she's paid for her work. And this is the derivative text for wages for housework. Oh, interesting. Moses' mother getting paid for breastfeeding. Yes. And then, this is the other thing that I think is kind of very interesting. Yocheved gives her child, normally you would nurse a child until much older than we do now, around 4. And she gives this child back to Pharaoh's daughter to raise him. And she adopts him, and she gives him this name, Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water." Now, I didn't bring all of these texts here about Pharaoh's daughter. Eventually, she becomes known as Batya, which means daughter of God. But her name is not mentioned here in the text. There are no women who are named in this section at all. We have Miriam, who's still unnamed, the servant girl who is unnamed. The first person who has a name here is Moses, and Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, is giving him that name. Now, the explanation for the name here, "I drew him out of the water," the rabbis kind of have issue with that. They can't quite figure out how they get that because it doesn't totally match with the Hebrew or Aramaic at the time. I had a classmate in rabbinical school who, before he went to rabbinical school, was an Egyptologist, and he said that this was probably a truncated form of the name Ramses, which is Ra, the sun god, and Mziz, which is son of. I don't know anything more than that one offhanded comment that he made, but it's always stuck with me. But the rabbis see Pharaoh's daughter as not just being instrumental in this moment, but they imagine her continuing to be a part of the Israelite nation. In fact, there is a midrash that she goes on to marry Caleb. Caleb is one of the spies in the book of Numbers who seeks out the land, they scout out the land of Israel, and 12 spies come back. 2 of them say the land is good and they should go forward, and 10 of them say no. Caleb is one of those people who say the land is good. Very interestingly, the rabbis also say that Miriam marries Caleb. So potentially, Caleb has 2 wives, one being Miriam and the other one being Pharaoh's daughter. If that were the case, I think I would better understand how Yocheved was able to give Moses to Pharaoh's daughter. She trusted her in some way. Okay. I want to get to this like amazing midrash that inspired me to teach this class in the first place. So I want to move on to our next text, unless there are some burning questions or comments. All right. So what about the women? So we have these particular characters who were instrumental in moving the story along. But there were other reasons for why the women that Israel is redeemed because of the merit of these righteous women. So here we have in Exodus chapter 15, which is right after the Israelites have crossed the sea. The beginning of chapter 15 is the poetic version of these events, the Song of the Sea, Shirat Hayam. And then we have this little addendum that right after that we have, then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels. And Miriam chanted for them, "Sing to Adonai, for God has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver God has hurled into the sea." Look at how Miriam is described here. First of all, this is the first time we get her name. Miriam, the prophetess. Miriam is the first person that the Torah refers to as a prophet. She is the first person the Torah refers to as a prophet. None of the patriarchs, the Torah does not call any of the patriarchs a prophet. Moses is not called a prophet before Exodus chapter 15. That honor goes to Miriam. There are scholars who believe that Miriam actually played a much bigger role in the story, and her part was cut, to diminish her role. And there are some vestiges of that, and this is one of the things that they point to. Miriam, the prophetess. And then how else is she described? She's described as Aaron's sister. She's not described in relationship to Moses. I think it's a fascinating thing. All right, let's look at the Rashi on this. He's gonna focus more on the women, right? Because Miriam, she starts dancing, and all of the women follow her. And Rashi's asking, like, where did they get timbrels from? Where did this come from? And so this is what Rashi says. The righteous women in that generation were confident that God would perform miracles for them, and they accordingly had brought timbrels with them from Egypt. They came prepared to celebrate. They were like, all right, look, we've got no time to bake bread, but we've got to make sure we get those instruments with us. Like we know what the priority is, right? To me, I think it's so fascinating. One of the things that I do, I have a performance background. And so one of the things that I do is I do dramatic translations of text. And so at one service, I embodied Miriam, and I also play music, play drums. And so I had my drum there with me, and it was sort of like, yeah, it's a bizarre choice to make. You've got like no time, you've got no space, right? You can only bring what you can carry. But like, let's make sure I bring my instrument. Like it's an interesting choice there. And what Rashi and the rabbinic tradition is pointing out was that they had faith that this would actually work out. Yes, Marjorie.
So the people that are doing this scholarship saying that Miriam's role was cut back a little bit, are they suggesting that perhaps Miriam did the heroism that, I know this is perhaps heresy, but that Miriam was doing the stuff that Moses did in the story, and that's why she's described as Aaron's sister?
I don't think
They
that's
conflated the part.
Yeah, I don't think that that's what they're suggesting. I think what they're saying is that there's more to the story that was cut out. So not necessarily that she was in lieu of Moses, like, that they just swapped them out, but that there were other things that she did. Because here's the thing, when you look at their triangle of leadership, Moses is the person who's directly connected to God. Aaron is the person who manages all of the ritual, ceremonial things. Miriam is really the person who's taking care of the people. Like when Moses and Aaron are negotiating with Pharaoh, like who's convincing the people that they should do what they need to do in order to help move this along? Because like at some point early on in the story, Pharaoh harshens the punishment against the Israelites. He takes away the straw, but continues to have the quota for the bricks that they're supposed to be making. And the Israelites are sort of like, oh my God, you made it worse for us, And so like who reassures them? And so like that's my sort of understanding of what role she might have had. That's all me, not based on anybody else's scholarship. And then it makes sense to me why she is the one who has a well that travels along with her, because she's the one who's taking care of the people. Both Aaron and Moses end up being kind of supernatural. Moses sees, the back of God, and from that moment on, his face is shining so brightly that he wears a veil. It's like that's a real separation between him and the Israelites. Aaron wears these elaborate garments, and when he is dressed as the high priest, he is not Aaron anymore. He is something else. Miriam doesn't have that kind of transformative thing. She remains accessible to people. So anyway, that's sort of like my spin on it. Sonia.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm remembering correctly, but if I am, wasn't it Miriam and wasn't it Rashi on Miriam earlier in the texts who convinced her father to remarry her mother? So was it her mother? So she's the one, as Rashi said, and he says it again here, she's the one who had faith that things would work out. I mean, she's that grounded and in some ways that connected to God. And I think that's to my making sense of what you've presented us. That's why she's called a prophetess. And that's why she brought her timbrels. I mean, she knew it would all work out. She had faith, and she generated that in the people. That's what needs to happen. You know, I think that's in some ways women's role, it seems to me. You know, they do the basic believing in what's right and in doing what's right, and, you know, propelling humanity further and better. You know, and related to nowadays, our political and our global political scene, you know, it seems to me there are some men who are standing out as just as heinous creatures, and not that there aren't women who can be, but it seems that the women's voice in leadership positions is getting stronger and doing and having faith in humanity. That's going a little bit off, but anyway.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct in that. One of the reasons why the rabbis see the women as being righteous is because of the emunah, because of the faith that they have. Actually, there are a few texts I did not bring tonight because there just isn't enough time, but that's specifically what the rabbis say. They take this point that Rashi makes here, and it's not just about Miriam, because it's not just Miriam who has timbrels. All the women do too. She's not the only one who thought, like, let's bring the instruments. All of the women did too, right? And so that kind of hope and steadfastness and belief and faith, those are all necessary, because without that, like, how can you even act, right? Contrast this with what Amram did, according to the Midrash, right? Amram is discouraged by the decree, and he's sort of hopeless. And so he's like, well, that's it. Let's just we'll just stop. We'll just stop having families. We'll stop having babies. And Miriam's like, you're going to be kidding me. There's so many reasons why you should continue to have babies. Like this, to me, I think it's definitely connected to that attribute of being able to have hope and to have faith. And absolutely, I think the rabbis, when they are creating the story in the above about Miriam being the one who convinces Amram and all of that, like, I think that's tied to them trying to understand why she's called a prophetess. I think that's part of what their agenda is there. All right, are we ready for the Midrash that I think is just absolutely wild? Yes, yes, okay. So it starts out with the quote that I brought you at the very beginning. Rav Avira taught in the merit of the righteous women, in the merit of the righteous women that were in that generation, the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. Now, when I first read that line, I was expecting Rav Avira to go on about the women that I just talked about. Like, I'm expecting Rav Avira to tell me about Yocheved and Batya and Miriam, right? But no, twist. We go into a very different direction. So Rav Avira tells of their righteous actions. At the time when these women would go to the river to draw water, the Holy One, blessed be they, would materialize for them small fish that would enter into their pitchers, and they would therefore draw pitchers that were half filled with water and half filled with fish. And they would come and place 2 pots on the fire, 1 pot of hot water for washing their husbands, and 1 pot of fish with which to feed them. And they would then take what they prepared to their husbands to the field, and they would bathe their husbands and anoint them with oil and feed them the fish and give them to drink and bond with them in sexual intercourse between the sheepfolds. Okay, not the direction I thought we were going in, right? We are told this story, which is not at all connected to the original text. We have no story about this custom of women going to the river and drawing water and all this stuff. Like, none of this appears in the Torah. This is all rabbinic midrash. And so what is happening here is that the men are laboring and they're not coming home and they're not having sex with their wives. And so in order for the women to actually have the opportunity to get pregnant, they need to do their own kinds of preparation. And so God kind of helps this along and helps it happen by allowing it to be easy for them to not only get the water, but also the fish. I feel like it's got some sort of aphrodisiac kind of connotations here. Like, isn't like oysters or something supposed to be aphrodisiac? But like, it's something like, okay, this will really put them in the mood. So, but of course they need to wash up first, right? It's like a very practical thing. It's like, let's eat a little meal, like they are wining and dining their husbands in a way. So they, they go to the fields, they bathe their husbands, they anoint them, they make them feel good again. And then they sleep with them. And the rabbis bring this quote from Psalms. Rabbis are always bringing proof texts. They're always trying to ground what they say, the wild imagination that they have, in something that's written. And so this is the proof text that we get. This quote from Psalms: "When you lie among the sheepfolds, the wings of the dove are covered with silver and her pinions with a shimmer of gold," which is interpreted to mean that as a reward for when you lie among the sheepfolds, the Jewish people merited to receive the plunder of Egypt. As it's stated in the continuation of the verse, as reference to the Jewish people, the wings of the dove are covered with silver and their pinions with the shimmer of gold. So basically what this is saying is we have this verse from Psalms, which talks about having sex in the border between the borders and fences of the fields. That's what sheepfolds means here. And then you seemingly get some sort of prosperity from it. And so Rav Avira is making the argument that, this verse from Psalms is referring to this thing that the Israelite women did. They would have sex with their men in the fields, and because of that, they are rewarded the opportunity to take the riches from the Egyptians when they leave. I think I'm not going out on a limb here to say that is a stretch. This is so out there for me. Like, first of all, in rabbinic work, if you are using a proof text from Psalms, already it's not a great argument. Psalms is a book of poetry, and so it's like not great to hook your teaching into that. You really want something that's going to be more like substantive, right? Like what we had up above is Serach bat Asher about pekadity. Those are texts from the Torah, like that. Oh, that feels good. This feels a little like so far away from what you're talking about, but okay. All right, Adria, I see your hand.
But how do you think they had gold for the golden calf? I don't know. That makes sense that they took stuff from the Egyptians.
No, you're absolutely right. The text says that they do plunder Egypt. They take from Egypt.
I mean, the golden calf is, in the Bible. It's right there in the Torah.
Of course. And also, we build the Mishkan with very elaborate materials. We build the tabernacle with very elaborate, precious materials. So that must have come from somewhere. The thing that I'm saying is a stretch is connecting that verse to this story of the women bathing and anointing their husbands and like, you know, like to me, that's very far-fetched, that kind of connection. But
I think that's like a cultural kind of thing. What that put me into is like, you know, May Day celebrations in Britain. And I'm sure that these kind of collective loving, I mean, by them bathing and anointing their husbands, they're much more desirable to have sex with than when they're grungy in the field. You know, they probably came all cleaned up themselves. So it's very majestic in its way. Culturally.
I absolutely agree with you. I think that's right. I'm saying that the biblical text itself has no indication of that happening. And the fact that Rav Avira has manifested this story and he's tethering it to the biblical text with this quote from Psalms, which is not very, like, it doesn't, I think, explicitly support his idea here. It's like, I think it's an interesting amount of leeway that we're giving to him. All right, so then what happens? Okay, let's go on. And then when these women would become pregnant, they would come back to their homes. And when the time for them to give birth would arrive, they would go and give birth in the field under the apple tree. As it stated, under the apple tree I awakened you. There your mother was in travail with you. There she was in travail and brought you forth. And this is a quote from Song of Songs. Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, is the book in the Bible about love. It is an explicit, erotic love poem. It is absolutely talking about like sex and nature and using different kinds of metaphors that are, you know, really based in nature. And here we have this idea that these Israelite women would get pregnant and they would give birth under the apple tree, because it's now connected to this like Song of Songs verse. Then what happens? And the Holy One, blessed be she, would send from the heavens above an angel who would clean and prepare the newborns, just as a midwife prepares the newborns. As it said, and as for your birth, on the day you were born, your navel was not cut, nor were you washed with water for cleansing. You were not salted at all, nor swaddled at all. That's a quote from Ezekiel, one of our prophets, who has wild visions. If you ever want to read like some wild things, Ezekiel is your place. This indicates that there were no midwives to take care of the Jews born in Egypt. So who was the midwife there? We didn't have Shipra and Pua in this story here. No, we have God through an emissary, an angel, who cares for them the way that, like, you know, like a nanny would, or something like, you know, a midwife, a nurse, right? Tends to these children who are in the wild. And then the angel would gather for them 2 round stones from the fields, and the babies would nurse from them, from that which would flow out of them. 2 round stones, like breast-like, right? And these stones would produce different things. One of the stones flowed with oil, and one of the stones flowed with honey. As it stated, and he would suckle them with honey from the crag and oil from a flinty rock. This is a verse from Deuteronomy. I know, Marjorie, I see your face. It's like, why, right? Can you see why I wanted to teach this class based on this wild midrash? It's wild. Like the rabbis are trying to figure out, like, okay, so how do we, this is the first proof text that we're getting from the Torah. And it's from a poetic section of the Torah. So already it's like, okay, you know, the idea that this angel, arranges these stones, and one stone has oil and one stone has honey, and that's what these babies are surviving on. Okay. They are being nourished entirely in a miraculous way. They are not drinking milk. They are not drinking anything from an organic, organics. I don't know if the stones are, I guess not, they are organic. I don't know, but do you know what I mean? Like, it's not from an animal. It's not from a human. This is counter to everything that we know about nature. And so I think that's to indicate that this is absolutely because of divine intervention that these babies are being fed. And then once the Egyptians would notice them, realizing that they were Jewish babies, they would come to kill them. But a miracle would occur for them and they'd be absorbed by the earth. And the Egyptians would then bring oxen and would plow upon them. As it stated, the plowers plowed upon my back. They made long their furrows, also from Psalms. Okay, so now we have a different level of protection. It's not just the angel there that's making it possible for them to be nourished. They're in danger. The Egyptians are coming to kill them because they realize that these are Jewish babies. They're Israelite babies. So what does the earth do? Mother Earth, she swallows them up and protects them. And even when the Egyptians are trying to, get at them in the ground, she doesn't allow that to happen. It is only when the Egyptians would leave that the babies would emerge and exit the ground like grass of the field. As it stated, I caused you to increase even as the growth of the field, also from Ezekiel. And once the babies would grow, they would come like many flocks of sheep to their home, as it's stated in the continuation of the verse. And you did increase and grow up, and you came with excellent beauty. And the words there for excellent beauty are ba'adi adayim. And Rav Avira doesn't want you to read those words that way. He says, do not read the verse as ba'adi adayim, with excellent beauty. Rather, read it as be'idrei adarim, meaning as many flocks. So not only is Rav Avira pulling from these sort of like sources that are unusual to pull from, but he's even changing the language to make it suit his argument. He's really working hard here to make this happen. And when the Holy One, blessed be he, revealed God's self at the Red Sea, these children recognized God first. As it stated, this is my God and I will glorify God. They recognized God from the previous time that God had revealed God's self to them in their infancy, enabling them to say, this is my God. This line from Shirat Hayam, from the Song of the Sea, where the Israelites are crying out and they say in victory, right? They've just survived crossing the sea. And they say, Ze Eli ve'anvehu, this is my God and I will glorify God. How did they know that this was their God? Well, it's obvious, because God had been their midwife. God had made it possible for them to survive. And so they literally recognized God. Like when you pass somebody on the street and you're like, oh my God, that's so, there you go. It's like, it is a total upending of how I read that verse initially. This is my God. Rav Avira, man, I'm not sure exactly what he was on in order to get there, but I'm glad. I'm glad. So the next thing that I bring you is a short article from the Shema, which was a journal. This is by Rabbi Jane Kanarek, who is She was one of my teachers at Hebrew College when I was in rabbinical school. It's a really incredible piece. And she talks about this midrash in detail. And she talks about how in Shirat Hayam, in the Song of the Sea, you have the image of God as being a warrior. But in these rabbinic texts, you have the image of God as being a midwife. And so here's one of the points I wanted to get to. For while the Song of the Sea portrays God as a warrior, it also describes God as guiding Israel in love, bringing the people into the promised land and even to the temple. In other words, as a caregiver. In Exodus 15, the earth swallows and buries the Egyptians. In the Bavli, in the Talmud, the ground swallows and protects the women and the babies. By choosing these images over the predominant ones of warrior and war, the Bavli, the Talmud, presents us with an alternative metaphor of savior. Instead of saving Israel by killing the enemy, God saves Israel by aiding in birth and preventing the enemy from killing. Right? I think it's so beautiful. The way that she ends it here, I really love to. By drawing on less noted images in Exodus 15 and weaving them together with other scriptural verses, the Bavli, the Talmud, provides us with another metaphor for God. Midrash teaches us that the divine is limitless. For if the warrior God can become a midwife, what else might be possible for us to imagine? Right?
That's beautiful.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. So the last thing that I'll the last couple of texts, I know we're a little bit over time, so if you need to leave, I totally understand. But so here we have in Exodus in chapter 6. We have this phrase that we're familiar with. We hear it when we say it when we at our seders in the Haggadah. Say therefore to the Israelite people, I am Adonai. I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians and deliver you from their bondage. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and through extraordinary judgments. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. And for me, it's like, what if that arm was like a midwife's arm, outstretched to catch the baby as it's born? And there is a lot of birthing imagery in the story of the Israelites, going from a very narrow place through water onto the other side where it's more expansive and wilderness, where they have to learn how to be an independent people. And so I think not only are these named women in the text and the unnamed women in the text, but also God is really leaning on the power of the feminine to make it possible for the Israelites to be freed from slavery. And the Yalkut Shimoni, which is a midrashic text from somewhere between the 11th and 14th century, they say, generations, meaning all generations, will not be redeemed but for the merit of righteous women of that generation. It's not just true about what the Israelites experienced then, it's also true about now. So if we want redemption to come, it's on us to access that divine feminine power, harness it in order to make it happen. And so let's do it. Let's do it. Truly, thank you so much for joining me and giving me this opportunity to really dive into these texts that I love and to explore these characters who deserve more prominence in our tradition when we are telling this story about this foundational story, this core story about who we are as the Jewish people. We cannot forget the heroic acts of the women in this story and the divine feminine that made it possible. Adria, I see your hand.
Well, what a fabulous class and what a lovely learning experience. And so, wow, great teachings. Thank you. And my question is, did you send us like this printout of these stories? Did they come in an email or will you send it out to us?
Yeah, so I'm going to send the recording and the source sheet to everybody who's registered for the course. And, if you know of other folks who might want to use some of this at their Seder, you can let me know and I'd be happy to share it with them as well.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have it be an option whether people want to get into it or not. That happens in the moment.
Yeah.
Great. I feel pretty transformed by some of it. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. That's a big compliment. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you. This is my first time studying with you all, and I feel so welcome. I'm just remembering when my children were adolescents, I started sacrificing my Sunday mornings, teaching religious school to middle schoolers. And how interesting that we're brought back to the apple tree. Because what I used to tell the kids is we learned through contrast. We left Eden, which must have been boring. We ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and we were thrust onto this playground of contrasts. And I think it's so interesting now that we're starting to understand that there are many more indices to gender. And we're going deeper and we're understanding the masculine, feminine energies of balance. And also too, I do work in teaching young people awareness-based systems. I don't want to say change models because that's too much hubris, but transformation. And that the prophetess opened to the field of future potentials. For that emergence in such a dark time is really, I'm taking that away and feeling like I don't know how to language the things that I see as a modern mystic, and Midrash is the genre I just might be looking for. So thank you so much. Thank you, women and folks. Thank you.
Well,
Judith,
thank you.
you might be interested in Rabbi Sol's class on women's midrash at B'nai Jeshurun.
Yeah.
If it's live, I'm out of luck. I was living in New York and now I'm in Wisconsin. So thank you though, but I'll look for it. Thank you, Marjorie.
On Zoom, it's a Zoom thing.
Oh, super.
On live, it's Tuesdays, 12:30 to 1:45.
But I think it's might be available by recording also.
Yes,
Thank you
that
so
is
much.
as well, I believe.
Thank you.
And I'll just also say, if you're interested in diving more into female characters in the Bible, I'm teaching a class at the Stryker Center called Bad Girls of the Bible. And so it's on Monday nights. And if you're interested, reach out to me and I'll send you the information. And in that class, I go into specific female characters, look at the biblical text around them, look at the rabbinic text around them, and try to understand them more holistically rather than just being like an archetype of this one's good or this one's bad. But definitely Felicia's class, I think, is that is an excellent place to go. I mean, Felicia is a phenomenal teacher of everything.
There's just one other little tidbit that I'm recognizing so contemporary is the plundering of Egypt is a way of thinking of reparations.
Yes. So that particular part of the story, the rabbis do go into to try and understand exactly what it means that they plundered Egypt. Some rabbis, some of the Midrash says that the Egyptians willingly give it to them. Others say that it's reparations, maybe even like violent taking of those things as sort of retribution for what they've experienced. So it is characterized very differently depending on which midrash you're looking at. But yes, that's certainly one of the ideas. Well, I just want to express my gratitude. Thank you so much to everybody who was able to make it tonight. And if you have any other thoughts or need anything, of course, please be in touch. And I'm wishing you all an early Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach. May we merit to bring redemption to us and to the world soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
shalom.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.